is. So obviously you got to use whatever you can to kind of know where they're coming from and where they're going to, right? So I'm working on this back left foot, so I know that it's going from there and it's just swinging underneath itself like that. So on this pose, it's going to be, I know that it's going to be around, I'm guessing, it's down a little bit. I know it's going to be around there. And this is where you want to get your pole vector. Not that one. Cool, that's the last one. There we go.
So this rig, compared to a lot of free ones out there, it's not that much advanced, right?
Not that much. So what? Sorry?
It's not that more advanced than any other free rig out there.
No, not really. No, it's just you know, I definitely like to this is just a personal preference. I definitely like to animate creatures in IK head. Sometimes, you know, the first shot I did, sorry, this is the first shot, but the first shot in the sequence where the cub's sitting there and then it sits up and it starts stalking. I probably would have done that in FK, thinking about it. So, you know, there are some shots that you would do FK, but for me, I like to treat it as, you know, independent objects. So the head, chest, and the hips, for me, need to be, you know, three independent objects moving together, but you need to be able to move one without affecting the other. And for me, doing that in FK, I find it very difficult unless it's a really advanced rig where you can move the chest and the head stays still. Most free rigs don't allow that, you know, so you'd have to do aim constraint tricks and things like that. So for me, I like to just animate in IK. Now, my head is in chest space purely because I'm blocking, but at some point, usually in when I'm adding my breakdowns, blocking plus, definitely spline. That's when I start to switch it to world space so that when I move this around, the head don't follow. But when I'm roughing it out, it doesn't bother me. But yeah, in terms of what this rig can do, it's, you know, it's not really an advanced rig, but you know, it gets a job done.
Yeah. It's what you do with it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I just want to get as close as I can, and curls around a little bit more, I think. So if I bring this way. Okay, I'm just doing this rough now. I'll tell you what, I did do the tail when I blocked it in, at least for my key poses, maybe not so much for my breakdowns, but for my key poses, I did invest some time into the tail, and the tail was a bit of a nightmare come polish, especially when I was falling around on the floor. I kept on I kept on having to make myself an IK rig, which is a nightmare. So basically what I did was I duplicated the tail, and when it was on the floor, and for a certain amount of frames, I duplicated it and I made myself a fake IK rig. So again, thanks to locators, not using this tool, but I was able to constrain my FK rig to my duplicated IK rig. And it weren't until my last couple of days of polishing that I realized it had an IK option. I didn't even know. I just, because advanced skeleton, you can, when you initially set up your rig, you can say, look, I want this to be, you know, an IK spline, FK spline, whatever. I didn't know that it had an IK tail. But when I had to do a final fix on the tail, keeping it locked down because I still wasn't happy with it, I was dreading making another tail rig because I had to do that per section of frames. And I was like, oh, I can't believe this. And then I checked it and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I spent all this time doing that. And it had an IK option anyway. So yeah, make sure you check your rigs properly. But it was good because, you know, if I ever need to do that again, it was a good hack. I think learning rigging, you learn a lot of hacks. And for me, that really helped this shot. So basically, yeah, I just did a basic tail pass, all in FK. And let's say I spent a little bit of time making that a nice pose, and then I went in and did my breakdowns. So I'll show you how to do a couple of breakdowns, and then I'll move on to the next one. So my breakdowns is pretty simple, really. I pretty much went found an in-between key because I want to go like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4. So that's perfect. So
I asked you if is this the same way you work, the same workflow they use at work? So like Light King, for example, with your 3D tracking, myosine and everything. Pretty much process.
No, you know, for most shots, I do. You know, I don't do fight shots at work. So most of the time it is layered. It is a layered approach. So where I would just hide the legs and, you know, move the body, or, you know, depending on the shot, like some shots, or most of the time you know, you'd use a cycle and you would start from that as a base. So most VFX houses, however big or small, has a library of cycles that people do, right? So you wouldn't, depending on the place and the person, you wouldn't, if you had an animal walk in up to a rock and then jump in, you know, depending on how far it was, you wouldn't do that from scratch, and you wouldn't do that in steps, especially if you're like, if you're in film, if you're in TV. So you would take a cycle and you would put that in, and then you would put the cycle up until it gets to the rock, and then you would rough it in with either stepped pose to pose, or you would do a layered approach. So most of the time I start with someone cycle, whether I did it or someone else, because you want to get from start to finish as quickly as you can, but, you know, to the best quality you can, right? Especially when there's, you know, money involved. But because this was a personal test and I had no one breathing down my neck saying, I need this done now, I need, you know, or all these changes, you know, I was able to experiment and I was able to, you know, have fun with it. And I find that, you know, when you're in a big VFX place, it is very daunting. And, you know, you're going to go into dailies and you're like, oh, I'm really scared what they're going to say. And, you know, it can be daunting. And I think sometimes that can restrict how you work. Certainly with me, it did on Lion King. You know, you don't want to make a mistake, so you try and play it safe a lot. And I find that the people that are free and animate freely, they produce the best work in my experience. So because I had no one breathing down my neck on this, I was able to animate free. And, you know, I didn't care what mistakes I made. I wasn't costing anyone any money. And, you know, it turned out okay. I didn't have any time restrictions. So, you know, this probably took me about 3 months if I was doing 8-hour days. It took me probably about 5 months because I had 1 month where I didn't even touch the shot because of personal reasons. And then I'd be coming in, I'd do like 1 hour here, 2 hour sessions here. And then it got to the point where when I was full on polishing, I was transferring it backwards and forwards to my work, and I was doing it during lunch breaks. I was coming in early and, just to try and get it done. But there were long periods where I didn't touch the shop for a week or a few days. But because of that, I was able to just relax with it and experiment. And yeah. I hope that helped. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think it did. Cheers.
So if I delete, I was just going to show you how quickly do a breakdown. So if I delete this one, so I've got key pose here, and I've got a hotkey to set that to yellow, and I've got a hotkey to set that onto yellow as well. I'll just K. But again, there's so many scripts around online now. You can just find like color keys. I think you can even do it in Maya. I'm pretty sure Animbot does it. So I don't have these as key poses, but sometimes if I've got keys like on ones, or I've got messy keys or whatever, and I need to copy this like frame 12 to frame 60, sometimes it's easier just to see a yellow and then go to that and then copy and paste, so now I know that this front right foot comes over and plants there. I'm going to set a key there. So I'm going to go step tween, and I'm going to have this foot. This is where if this foot was planted here, you could use a tween machine tool or something like that. But because it plants and then comes back up, I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball that.
So Anna asked you, did you change the timing of the animation after the blocking compared to the rep?
No, I didn't change the timing. I had to change some of the distance. So, when I was blocking, I blocked it out, and then I did a breakdown pass, which is what I'm doing now. And then once I'd done that, then after showing it, I realized that, the gate on the screen left cub wasn't that big. In actual fact, Dan Fotheringham, he said, very early on, that guy's got a crazy good eye. Very early on in blocking, he said, I'll just be careful of the screen left cub because it looks like he's a bit clunky the way he's running. Like it looks like his gait isn't big enough. And I opened it out a little bit, but it wasn't until I got into Spline Plus that I realized, okay, I need to open up the gate. And I think it got to like, polish, not like final polish, but real in deep in polishing stage. I opened it up even more. So I didn't change the timing, but I did change some of the strides on the screen left cub. So, it went from this to this. So, I think it really did help. But by doing that, it changed when he grabbed onto him. So I kind of had to reverse engineer that part. So when he jumped onto him, I couldn't change any of that. So I had to kind of open his gate up before then. But then, of course, when I did that, that affected where he was in camera because he weren't in camera anymore. So there's a lot of backwards and forwards to stuff like this. So anyway, that's how I do blocking. I use, for my breakdowns, like I said, it's a lot easier because I select all, and then I do step tween to get myself a good, a good base to start with, and then I take this one here. I flip backwards and forwards just to see where he's coming from and where he's going to. Now I know here, this is up a little bit, and if I scrub, maybe that's not. So that's that foot there is traveling. And really it only just comes off. So I'm actually going to copy that, paste that there, and then just lift it off slightly, because the frame before he's going to be planted, but I'm not going to do crazy breakdowns for every single step, not yet. You know, just kind of give myself a guide. Now I know that I need to bring that anchor up a little bit. And again, the same with the other foot. The other foot is easy because that didn't really move. So I'm just going to copy that and paste that there. And viewport 2.0 sometimes bugs out. So sometimes you have to just kind of move the control. And you know, as I'm working, obviously, you know, while you're doing this, you do it to camera, but you need to make sure that it's working from all views as well. It's very easy to, you know, forget.
And you're using one layer, right? You don't use multiple atom layers.
No, not yet. No, I only do that really on the final. You know, once I've got the nuts and bolts, and I'm in polish, and I'm adding like nuances and things like that. I definitely wouldn't do that in blocking. Even if I was doing layered, I'd try and keep it as clean as possible. Now I think he's too far back there. Either he's too far back, or this foot is too far forward. And you know, you don't want to move the shoulder too much, but so let's just set one more breakdown and then we'll move on, right? Let's just get a starting pose. Let's open my graph editor. Right, so like when I'm blocking, like, you know, my work's very clean when I block. When it comes to polish, that's when things get really messy. And I'm, you know, my HOD at work hates me for that. You know, I am improving, but you know, I don't work with the intention that I'm going to be passing someone else my scene. But you know, it's not a good practice, really. You know, you need to get into good habit. So it is something I'm definitely trying to work on. Right, so okay, that's weird. Right, so if that doesn't ever work, you just set that to linear. Let's go tangents, linear, and then set a key, and then switch it back. So that's basically what that script does. So we've got a base now. So last pose. So that foot comes way back and plants there. So I'm going to copy that one, paste that there. And that kind of gives me, you know, he's not moving too far. I think viewport 2.0 is bugging this out because it kept, unless it was a camera, but it looks like it was like going backwards and forwards. Yeah, you see that? It's not moving. Yet here it kind of go backwards and forwards. But anyway. So once I've done that, I just because I'm talking, I'm forgetting what what poses I'm doing. All right, so that one there, that I need to bring that foot up. Okay, so I know that. So let's bring that front right foot up, and let's bring his chest up a little bit. And if you're not getting the same shape and you're confident that you've got the height and the chest right, it's probably the shoulder. So let's go and check that. Yeah, so look, let's just reset that. Okay, it's another thing to look out for when you're blocking, you know. But again, I know this is taking some time, but I know that when it comes to spline it, you know, my spline wasn't, you know, I had good poses, and my spline wasn't that painful to clean up. The other thing I'm paying attention to as well when I'm doing this, obviously I'm flipping backwards and forwards, but I'm paying attention to, you know, when his foot is on, his foot is down here, right? So I need to think about where if I'm looking front on, where his weight is. So it's not just a case of doing it from camera. I think this is where a lot of people go wrong when they're doing it from camera, when they're just rotoring stuff, you know, people starting out. You need to pay attention to where, you know, where the weight's being transferred to and from. Let's just reset that. Just so it's a little bit cleaner. You know, I can't pull that down too much.
For that, I've asked you, do you space switch between the hips and chest for this root control during this stage?
Do I space switch?
Between the hips and the chest for the root control.
Not during blocking. Basically, you know, this is a bit of a fail safe for me. You know, this is well, how can I put it? You know, I use this as like a toy, you know, to move around, and then I just use these guys as to refine that pose, you know. But I don't space switch until I go into. Do you mean space switching this? I'm not sure I followed. Let me see the. Can I see the chat?
Bernard, are you there? Did that answer your question? Space switching.
Oh, space switching the pivot. Okay, yeah, no, that's a good question actually. Yeah, so it is probably a good practice to, you know, once I discovered this, you know, Dan gave me some advice. If you look on his blog as well, he basically changes the pivot from here to the middle, so it does give him that freedom of moving. If you're looking at it from above, you're moving a toy around, right? So some people like having it animated from the back. However, one thing I discovered recently, if I just open the Animbot, I wish I discovered this when I was blocking this shot, because this is probably the best thing I've ever seen. If it loads, come on, here we go. So using Animbot, I can now change the pivot on the fly. So if I select my root and I just want to, let's say I want to pivot from the feet and I want to have him kind of, you know, rear up and swing around, I can select my route, and I can select the pivot. I can put it down here, and then I can rotate it up like that. And then you select that again, and then, you know, there you go. Right, and then let's say I press it again, it remembers where that pivot is. And then I can rotate it again, I can rotate it around, you know, super powerful. So now I'm discovering all these new tools. It makes me even more free when I'm animating. You know, I'm not constrained to like where the pivot is, or, you know, what space the chest is in, or the head is in. You know, I'm not freaking out as much anymore. For me, the biggest game changer since I came across Dan's blog a few years ago was to hide the legs. You know, not now because I'm blocking in stepped, but certainly when I do a layered approach, if you haven't got an option to have a proxy rig like this, I would put the legs into body space and just tuck them away somewhere. You know, just put them under the chest, or there's another tool where you can select the faces and you can hide the faces, so you can set them to transparent. There are lots of ways of doing it, but for me, when I'm blocking stuff, whatever rig I'm using, where possible, I would have to have a proxy rig, just purely because I can go and hide the legs. Now, again, I haven't got it here, but in a later file, I'll start hiding them. And actually, I'm going to show you now. Has anyone got any questions on this? Because I think I spend a lot of time blocking and whatnot. So I didn't realize the time. Sorry.
Oh, you're right. Can you just quickly go over that? Change your pivot again. So you can toggle between.
Yeah. So basically, it's this. This is on Animbot. So you'd need to use Animbot for this. You can cheat and you can use locators. So let's say I'll show you a quicker way of, not quicker, but I'll show you a manual way of doing it. But basically, if you've got Animbot, you select this icon down here, and I think you can reset the pivot. So if you click on this little arrow, temp pivot centered, reset temp pivot. Okay, so that's my pivot by default. Now, when you first hit this button, it gives you an option to rotate it or move it around, right? So I'm changing where the pivot is at the moment. Let's go to my camera view. Now, it's only when I press W, E, or R for my move, scale, or rotate. It's only when I press that is when it actually allows me to rotate the character from that point or move the character. So right now, let's say I want to pivot from his nose. He's just run into a wall. If I press E for my for rotate, he can run into the wall and then whoosh, hit the wall like that. And you know, I would use that as I would use my route as the main driver. I'd pivot from there. I'd have a pose there, and then from there, that's when I would use all my chest, my hips, and stuff as the as a sculpt to sculpt the pose, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So that is awesome. I discovered that. I use that in A-Tools. A-Tools has got that as well. But I think they've the guy is Alan Camillo, I think. I don't know if I said that right. Amazing guy, by the way, for doing this. I think he revamped it so that it's got better functionality on the pivot changer. So really, really powerful. But if you want to do it manually, if you don't have this option to, you can create a locator yourself. So if I go create locator, show, if I select my route, select the locator, and I'm just going to snap it. Again, this is why I'm saying, like, you need to get into a kind of mindset or rigging mindset, or learn rigging at least. to learn these hacks so you don't have to do this stuff manually, you know, because I've got a tool, a script that I found. I find a lot of scripts or I get people to write them for me. Be friends with riggers. So I've got a script that if I select my route, it creates a locator where that is, and that saves me hassle, you know, doing it manually. So if I now select this locator, that's there. And what I'm going to do, I don't know what this one is. I'm going to hide that. So this is my locator I just created. It's doing nothing at the moment. So I'm going to move it. I want my pivot to be about here, right? So I'm going to constrain that locator to my root. So I'm going to select the root, then my locator. I'll go parent constraint, maintain offset. Actually, I'll tell you what I'll do. Let's say we have it from the nose. And then let's say he's just run into a wall. And this is a good trick I learned from my HOD, Chris Hutchison. I learned it from him a few years ago. If you, whatever part of your timeline you've got selected, you can do what you want. You can constrain what you want, and then you can just bake that section down. I think you have to do it on ones first. Is the best practice. Delete the constraint. Outside of that timeline section is safe, but that section of your timeline, you've constrained it, you've baked it down, you've deleted the constraint, you've baked it on ones, and then you bake it again on like 2, 3s or 4s or whatever. But that section, you can then, you know, outside of that section is safe, basically. So let's constrain.
So with that, actually, when you're baking in the timeline, you have to make sure the one box is checked that says keep unbaked.
Yeah. So bake it. Yeah. So yeah. So you got smart bake or bake on ones. So I would bake it on one. So I'm just gonna select everything very quickly. I'm gonna show you guys. I'm gonna reset just before I move on because I know I'm gonna delete everything. And I'll just do a little test, right, just to show you guys what I mean. And I'm going to switch this back to linear. And then I'm going to, let's say, look at this guy here. I'm going to delete these guys. All right, let's do a little test. So we've got a cub running along, Tom and Jerry style. And he runs into a wall. And then we want, hits the wall, compresses, and then goes up, right? So as soon as he hits the wall, that's there. Outside of that, I don't really want to touch. So I'm going to start from 29. And then, because I've got no other keys, it don't really matter. So from 29, I don't really want to try and counter and have this, you know, find this point where its nose is. But using Animbot, I could just quickly change that pivot, rotate it up, rotate it back down, and then, you know, and then I add in all my head shakes or whatever. So let's do that manually. So I'm going to go back to 29. So he just ran into the wall, and I want to change the pivot from here to where his nose is. So let's go to your locator. I'm going to snap this to the nose, or roughly. It doesn't have to be perfect. Select the root, select the locator, and then we're going to go constrain, parent, and let's turn on maintain offset, and then go add. So now a locator is there, right? Or by the nose. Now, if we bake that down, you can smart bake this. So bearing in mind, you'll have, like, you know, a lot of keys for your blocking and whatever. So it's bake simulation. Now your first one you want to do is smart bake. You don't want that on ones because that's just your locator. So smart bake that. And then you're temporarily gonna constrain your route to your locator, right? So let's go to our locator, delete the constraint. So now your locator is doing what it needs to do. So now this locator here is going to be the driver, right? Just in that section. So now we're going to reverse the process. So we select the locator, select the route, and then we go parent constraint, maintain offsets, still checked. So now your locator is driving the route, but you still got keys on your route. Okay, so you don't want to kill that. So that's important because we're going to bake it off in a minute. So just in this point here, we're going to start to key the locator so that it goes up. So it hits the wall. Boom. And now, just in that section, so I'm going to go to 54 and just make that section now. Now select my route, and then I'm going to go edit, bake simulation. Now this time I want to bake it on one. So untick smart bake, bake it on ones, and that's going to bake just that section, right? And then you'll notice your keys are green, obviously, because we constrained it with keys. Now you can, there's two ways of deleting a constraint. So you can either, or there's a few ways actually. So frame the control in your outliner and find this little red icon, this chain icon, and just simply delete it. Or you can select it here in your shapes. Okay, press Control C, paste it down here, and then go delete, Control V, that delete it. Or you can press down and then left, and then that deletes it. So there's, there's a few ways of deleting a constraint. So now what's going to happen, you're still going to get that key, you're still going to get that animation, but before that happened, it hasn't affected it. Okay. And then you can, you can just go in and clean up that section. If we go, I've got a hotkey as well to smooth all this out. So I think it's used for mocap. OA smooth, I think it is. So if I select a bunch of these keys, I could just press M. I've set it for. I think this is why my HOD, when he sees my scenes, he freaks out because I've got keys everywhere sometimes. But because I've got this hotkey, when I've got crazy spikes in my curves, I've just kind of got into the habit of not worrying about it because I can do this. So it's been a bit of a blessing and a curse. So I've since started to clean up my act thanks to him. So I don't work this way as much anymore. I still get to a point where I'm, I think the final output is the most important thing. But if you can get amazing animation and your scene's a mess, the client isn't going to say, "Oh, can I see the scene?" They don't care. But there's a lot to be said for, there's trying to find a balance as well, So does that make sense? Oh, because I've messed around with all the curves, obviously it's messed with that. So don't do that, what I just did. But yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed that. That was great. Awesome.
Cool. All right, so I'm gonna
also shared your smoothing script as well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Some high end, so you guys want it, Toby just posted it up.
Sorry, what was that, Eddie?
Oh no, that was for everyone. Toby just posted up your smoothing script that you were using.
Okay, cool. Yeah, OA Smooth, I think it is. Yeah, so I don't know the source. I can't remember. Well, I can't remember. It was a long time ago, but yeah, it's really, really good. Really, really helpful. But like I said, it's a blessing and a curse because it just, you know, you go into my scenes and they'll be on ones, and it's just like, oh, how does he work like this? But so you know, I am improving my workflow now. Anyway, so I'm going to press on. So that was my blocking, and then I go to my spline. So this is my first spline pass. So, you know, for considering what was going on, I wasn't too panicky, you know, considering what's happening in the grand scheme of things, you know, all the jumping around and the pivoting, and, you know, when he falls on the floor, I thought it was going to be a complete mess. One thing I should add as well, when I was blocking in proxy mode, once I'd done a pass of my initial block, I switched it to the skinned rigs, because then I started finding issues where the wrists and the ankles sometimes were flipped, or the shoulder might be a bit too far pushed one way or the other. So it's important to look at it from the skinned version and just frame through it and just rein things in and tone it down a little bit. But yeah, that was my first spline pass. So then I go from spline, and you know, the dreaded question is, how do you get from spline to finish? You know, everyone hates spline in their work, especially if they're working in steps sometimes. So the easiest way that I can explain to get through that is by hiding the legs. So I'm going to quickly go to a later file. Actually, this is my other fight shot. So I think this is using the later rigs. And as you can see, I've got, so this is the one where they're going nuts and they're really beating the crap out of each other. So, oh yeah, another cool handy trick that I've picked up along the way is with my marking menu, I can select all and things like that. But if I select a control, I can also select quickly. So I can just select that character. And again, I like doing the marker menu because it's kind of like you know, it's a flick of a brush almost, you know, it's just nice and quick. So I can select him, I can select the other guy if there's like a lot of characters in the scene, and I could just, you know, select and just work on those two. Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. So if I just select this one guy and I'm going into spline it, the best way to do it for me without freaking out is just hide the legs and make sure your root animation is as smooth as you can. So I'm actually going to open up a previous scene. And carb. Let's go, let's just find anyone. Has anyone got any other questions while this is opening up?
Yeah, feel free to jump in the webcam as well if you want to ask it. So do you find your later shots now, they're a lot quicker, just in terms of your workflow, your planning, just like that?
Yeah, I think so. It's really it's really improved my workflow a lot. Like I'm doing another personal test at work, like because I'm doing the cubs at home, and I'm doing another personal test at home where I've got this deer. It's jumping around in this huge puddle, and it's insane the way it's pivoting around, and it jumps and it hops and does this, that, and the other. But because I'm using Animbot, it's crazy how quick I've moved through. I blocked like 400, 500 frames, I think, in spline. I've got a half decent spline pass. I think I've just started doing. I've got one more leg to do, so I started with no legs, so I just got him moving about, and then I did the front legs. And as soon as you start adding the legs, that's when you start realizing how pivots change. Okay, so he's hopping, and then he pivots over, and then he hops again. But using Animbot, I can just freely move him about, change a pivot, freely move him about, and it's really, really helpful, and really helps speed up your workflow. So let's say I'm just going into spline. This isn't a spline early spline pass, but let's say that I'm just taking into spline, and get into good habits. The first thing that I do before I even start my scene, if I've got a proxy rig, is by attaching the legs to layers. So I would select this, even the controls and the shoulder, and then I would just go new layer and create it, front right leg or whatever. So now I can just hide all these guys. Hide the tail. I don't need any of this. And let's hide these guys for now. Even the pole vectors I'd put on layers. I don't know why they're not. Just put them on this layer for now. And then I would just start with the root. Okay, and then I would choose a small section, and I would just get that working. Now, really what I'm looking for, if you was to hide this, you want to get a nice constant speed from the root, because eventually I'm going to be baking these controls off. So if I was to add this to a layer, eventually my rig is going to look like this, and I'm going to be tracking these individually. Yeah, so I'm going to be tracking the arcs of the hips individually. But there might be a kink in my curve of my root, and unless I fix that first, I'm always going to be fighting against issues and problems and stuff. So let's go back and show my graph editor. There you go. You can see how messy it is. Oh no, let's just come out. Wait. Let's change that to. Okay, so that's on 1, 2, 1, 2. So that's baked on. Oh no, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So that's actually pretty clean, to be honest. For now, if you see my later scenes, you'll laugh. So yeah, I just want to make sure that I've got a nice clean curve. But see, here's the thing, right? It's very easy to go in and go, you know what? I'm just looking at a reference. Let's delete this. Let's delete this. Oh, that's not nice. Let's delete that. Let's delete that. It's very easy to do that. Yeah, to have a nice clean curve. However, because these cubs, the way they're running, I really wanted to capture the way they're running, and it's not a case of just cleaning this curve and having it move at a constant speed, because when you actually look at reference, they don't actually do that. Not for this particular test anyways. I wanted to get as close as I could to the test, to the reference as possible. So if I undo that, obviously there are moments where if I was to frame through. And obviously I want to look at the reference as well as I'm doing this. So obviously I'm looking at this one. Let's change it to spline or auto. Now I've got no real form reference, so let's show the front legs maybe as a kind of. I'm not too worried about pops happening. So you see there's a couple of pops happening in the legs. I don't care about that because I know that I can fix that with shoulders. I can fix that when I track the arcs of the feet later on. All I care about is, you know, any surges in here. Like I think there's a bit of a surge there. But I think if you look at the reference, it surges forward to kind of whack him. So I don't want to lose that. So I think that would be in this one here. Yeah, see that? It surges there. So I don't really want to lose that. So this is why it's important to me, you know, to find a balance where you haven't got curves like this for no reason, but, you know, you want enough dirt in the curves so that that makes sense, if that makes sense. If you've got a lion or creature that's just walking linearly, then your curve would be nice and clean. But when it's running along and it's changing its speed and it's, you know, it's a little bit clunky, you know, I wanted to keep that the essence of what's happening, if that makes sense. But you know, you can definitely, if I use that smooth tool, I can smooth moments like that out. See what's happening here. You know, you can definitely smooth that out a little bit. You know, I'm just focusing on my forward and back at the moment. And the other trick I learned as well, I'll quickly show you guys, is you see how my character's facing this way and it's running along this way, but my global control is facing this way. So it's going to make my axis completely off, right? So if I select this and then I go translate X, my translate X isn't doing really what it should be doing, because if I had an imaginary line going along here, that's my translate Z, and then X would be side to side for that. So what you can do is using this locator tool. If I select show all of my world space controls, I didn't have this when I was doing this, by the way. I think I was either doing it manually or using ML World Bake, which it does a similar thing, but this is super powerful. So this is a useful trick I learned while I was at MPC. So select your world space controllers, which is your root and your feet, your head if it's in world space. So no, that's in body space, so that's cool. Maybe your pole vectors, no, they're in body space. So there's just, yeah, so it would just be your feet and your root, right? You go, what you do, you make sure it's your timeline is set to, you know, it's expanded. And then you go back to locators, constrain to locators. Now what that allows you to do is freely move your global control. That's good for doing pre-roll as well. Now, if you've got to change your, if you've got pre-roll for something and you want to, if your global's over here and your character's over here and you have to do some muscle simulation or fur or dirt or whatever, and you have to pass it along, but you have to have your character at your global, it's global, and then you get pops and stuff. So this is a useful trick for that as well. So let's just make sure I've got no keys on my global control. And then what I'm going to do, because I want my character to be facing, I want my global control to be facing where my character is. So my character is now locked, but you can see what I'm getting at, right? And now if you select the same controls again, doesn't have to be in the same order. And then if you go bake controls, you'll have the same animation, but your X translation is doing what it should be doing, right? So that's going to change your curve in your graph editor. So just delete that random key. Yeah, so now if I move that key that way, my root is doing what it should be doing, if that makes sense. You might have to go in and run a Euler filter. Delete these keys. So if and you may have to, especially if it's just come out of spline, so it's okay. You might have to run an auto tangent. So I just run that.
So on that note, Anton, someone asked, how do you move on if you face Euler issues on root control and small rotation value, even if the rotation order doesn't favor? Is, I guess, covered in, someone posted also in there. And
so
this is quite log.
Yeah, that's another thing I've got Dan to thank for. So I've got a script here that I found on that same, thanks to the same blog, ML rotate converter, order converter. So what you can do is change your rotate order, and it tells you if there's gimbal lock. So if you select a control and get tips for selection, and it tells you what rotate order is gimbaled. So it's telling me that this is a non-world space recommendation, which is weird because it is a world space control. But anyway, current rotate. Let's try one of the other controls, right? Let's try this one. So, okay, so it's telling me this one is recommended. So let's change that.
So can you change this on the fly?
Yeah. You can totally change it on the fly.
Do you need to key it, or does it just give you the best option and it just adjusts to that?
It will give you the best option and adjust to that. But you might have to play with it, because I've selected one before, and then everything spazzed out, and my instead of my feet doing this, my feet was like all over the place. So you just have to kind of experiment. But if you do what it recommends, 9 times out of 10 it should be good. I'd run a Euler filter just to double check, and then this is just auto tangent. I've set to smooth, so I've just got a standard auto tangent, and then that should, so I've got my rotate order how I want it. So it's pretty cool trick. So yeah, then I'll just go and do a pass. I'll make sure the root is working, and then I'll do a pass where I'll just track the hips and the chest. I track the arcs. I'd go in and just make sure the up and down's working on the hips and the chest. So it's really important that you haven't got a clean up and down curve. You want to kind of favor stuff and really look for what's happening in your reference, right? So it's very easy to go into your graph editor and, like I said, just grab this, delete this key, delete this key, delete this, without actually seeing what's going on, because it's easy.